Cool. So just to start again, so the neurogenomics GitHub organization is where all of our code lives. Within that, you have many repositories. And as an example here, I'm going to show our workflows repository, which has all of the elements of this R package and the action, none of which is important for this. What's important is the issues. So every time there's a new thing that I want to add to this project or a bug that needs fixing, I go to new issue, and let's say I want to make a feature request, and then I write the title there, I document some stuff about it, and then it'll appear as a new issue here. So last night I was thinking about, okay, long term, how do we support our workflows and generally, support open source projects, and just put together a list of some resources that I found that might be useful. So that's all there. I have some tags there. These are called labels, where you put it as an enhancement or a bug or help wanted, and you can customize those however you want. You can also add labels that will assign different levels of priority, so that you can go back here and then filter however you want. So if I wanted to look for things that are bugs specifically, I can immediately filter that. Another thing that you may notice is there is now a section here called projects. So projects is GitHub Projects, which was introduced a number of years ago and was initially set up so that each repository would have its own project. And it was basically just a way of organizing and viewing all the issues within that project. But then they extended it and changed it. And now what a project is, it can span one repository, it can span many repositories. And that enables you to have a broader view of your objectives. So, for example, this is the one I made. This is the project that I made for my thesis. Now, my thesis has a lot of moving parts. It incorporates a lot of different repositories, and that can be very confusing to keep track of in like a million different Chrome tabs. So I've organized this in different ways. The first way, which you might be familiar with, is called a Kanban. Kanban is basically categorizing all of the different issues across the different repositories into categories of to do, in progress, or done. And that basically means that if you have assigned let's say, an issue like this, I can go to the repository. If I've assigned it to a particular project here, it will by default go to the to-do status. And if, let's say I started working on this, I now want to switch it to the in progress status. And now you can see it automatically jumps over to the in progress column. Similarly, if I were to just briefly close this issue, it will, in a couple seconds, move it over to the done column. So it basically means that unlike a lot of other project management software like Asana or any number of other third-party platforms, the GitHub Projects is designed to be directly integrated into your day-to-day workflow as a programmer. And just so I don't forget to do this, I'm going to reopen it. And it's just basically an aggregated view of everything that you do. And like I said, projects can span multiple different repositories. So here we have HBO Explorer, Magma cell typing, model cell type conservation, all these different projects. Now, something that I've also been trying to sort out is.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, yeah, please.
So what is the repository within, like what is it just a folder within your project, or is it?
A repository is, you can think of it as a folder within our organization, our GitHub organization account.
So all the repositories are within the neurogenomics workspace.
They are, yeah. I mean, you can have it in your personal one because like this is our lab's organization account. I also have a personal account where, for example, yeah, so like here I have my own projects that are outside of the organization. And these repositories just live in a different area of GitHub. It's called an owner. So like I'm the owner of these repositories, whereas neurogenomics is the owner of all of those other projects that I was showing you.
I'd say the way to think about a repository is as a self-contained piece of work, like a piece of software or.
Yeah.
Is there a limit to how many repositories we can have within the neurogenomics?
It's a good question. I've never hit that limit with any of the organizations I've worked with. We're at 121 but I mean, I guess there is a theoretical limit, but I don't think there's any explicit limit.
They limit the amount of data you can have in it, the size, that's how they limit it. They don't.
Okay.
Within a repository or across the entire organization?
Within a repository. There probably is some limit on data for the whole organization. I think they're changing their structure on this to make more people paid.
Yeah. Yeah, the GitHub is pretty lenient in terms of what you can upload and store. You know, they have some things where you can't have a file that's over 100 megabytes within a GitHub repository unless you pay for GitHub large file storage, which is another service that they have. You can get around that through releases, which is a separate thing that I can talk about another time. But yeah, as far as I'm aware, we can have an infinite number of repositories. And like Nathan said, a repository is, you know, a one thing. So it makes sense for Magma cell typing to have its own repository because that is its own piece of software. Our workflows is its own piece of software, but there's some wiggle room there. Like you can decide, you know, maybe there's, let's just use Alan's here as an example, like reanalysis, Mathis. It's not a package, but it's a set of analyses that all go together for a particular paper that you're working on. But you can pick and choose how you want to group things up or split them. The thing that I was starting to talk about was the fact that, okay, I have all these different repositories, but you'll notice some of these have some similar naming. This is rare disease cell typing, which is the main scripts for the rare disease project that Kitty and I are working on. You have the apps, which are basically the Shiny apps affiliated with that project, but they have their own separate repository. And you have rare disease prioritization, which is basically the programmatic version of Momoko's thesis, which aimed to identify gene therapy targets based on those results. So those are three related repositories. And what I find useful is to think of them all as kind of a one sub-project. And this is where milestones come in. So milestones are another aspect of the issue. It's basically another tag you can add to it. And you can see here, this is where the project is, but then you have the milestone. And
Can-
yeah,
no, no, sorry.
yeah.
So all the things you're showing, they're all specific to one repository. So the Kanban,
No, they're
Now
across
the-
many repositories.
so they're across many
Yeah.
repositories.
Yeah, it can be just one repository.
So like when
if
you
want
add
it to be.
something, you then have to assign it to a repository. Or, I mean,
When you add an issue, you're usually adding, issues are fundamentally associated with repositories.
Mm.
So the way that you add an issue is by going to neurogenomics, our workflows repository, and then going here and doing new issue. And as soon as you say that that issue is part of a project, it will then automatically appear as part of this project. So if you think of it as a hierarchy, you can say a project is kind of like the big overarching thing. So like, you know, my thesis, for example, which has many different elements. And then within that, I have many different repositories that I work on in order to complete that thesis. And the milestones that I was just mentioning, you can kind of think of it as a middle layer there. Milestones can be, you know, I have my thesis, but my thesis is one very big thing. And in order to break that down a little bit more in a logical way, I use milestones. So the milestones, you can make them whatever you want. I've organized them around manuscripts. So I have the model cell type conservation manuscript, which is, you can see I've just subset now the repositories and issues that are related to that. So there's some things in Magma cell typing that I have to fix in order to publish model cell type conservation. And then there's a dedicated model cell type conservation project, which has the analyses which use Magma cell typing, but there are scripts that go beyond just the Magma cell typing project, just the Magma cell typing package. And similarly, if we look at the rare diseases cell typing manuscript, there's several elements. There's 3 repositories mentioned before, and then these 2 are software that we use in these analyses and in the Shiny apps. And so they're all grouped together here. And, you know, I've grouped them by repository. But the nice thing about GitHub Projects is you can organize it in any way you want. So I've grouped it by repository here. You could group it by, let's say, priority. And I've added manually priority tags, high, medium, or low. So now it's showing the high ones first, regardless of what repository they're associated with. Then the medium, then the low. And if I wanted to say, all right, well, across all the milestones, all the things, basically every issue that's part of my thesis, if I want to organize high, medium, or low priority ones, go to deselect, so that we're now looking across all the milestones. And you can see all of the different tasks that I have, which are a lot. But at least I have a way of visualizing what needs to get done in what order. And in sort of these broad high, medium, and low categories. And you can still see the repository name here. And let's say I want to go into a little more detail, like, okay, repeat phenotype level enrichment analyses. What does that mean? I can open it up and say, okay, we're going to rerun the phenotype level gene set enrichment analysis with UC using this data set and this data set. And once I've done them, I can tick those. And it'll, you know, just another way of keeping track of different parts of it. All right, so does anyone have any questions so far?
a question?
Yeah.
No, it's good.
Yeah. Well, I should say, because for people who are not primarily computational, this can still be a useful tool because you can use GitHub for different things. There are, for example, GitHub repositories that are just documentation. No code, no anything. It's just markdown files or text files where you've written down documentation for different protocols, which you may want to put in lab step, but if there's something that doesn't quite fit within lab step that you would like to make more broadly available to the lab or even just publicly, you could make a GitHub repository that has documentation on that. And you can include links to other resources, whatever you want. And if you do that, that means you now have the ability to take advantage of issues, milestones, projects, basically all of the elements that I've introduced here. And so even though, even if you've never programmed a day in your life, this is a way that you can organize all the things that you do. And I should also mention, you don't even have to create a GitHub repository in order to use GitHub projects, because you can have certain let's say, show an example here. You can have things that are issues that are not associated with any particular repository. So here, this is just one that I made. It's not technically an issue, it's called a draft. It's just a placeholder for saying like, well, this doesn't really fit within any of the milestones. It's not within a repository or anything like that, but it's still related to my thesis. And this is how I basically have recorded, things like I need to submit the paperwork for entering writing up status for my thesis. And, if we look at that, I've included a link to the documentation for like what needs to be done, the paperwork. And I've also included the assignees, which is me and Nathan. And we can see it's in progress. I sent the paperwork to Nathan yesterday, I think. And I've set a deadline for both of us for this Friday. And I would consider this fairly high priority. This is another thing that I think I may have glossed over before, but you can also add dates, which are basically just custom fields. So if you go into up here, as we're looking at the project view, you'll see this triple dot. That is a drop-down menu, which has some additional things. And one of those is settings, where you can I can change the name of this project, change the description, some additional metadata, like this is where I have my the link to my Google Doc version of my thesis as I'm writing it up. And then you have this section here called custom fields. Now, you'll notice status looks familiar because this is something that is automatically set up for you by default with to do, in progress, done. But you can add other options if you want something that's in between, like maybe we decided to abandon a certain project or a certain issue, say, actually, it doesn't make sense to do this anymore. You could put it into a new category that says will not do or will not pursue. On hold or something like that. Yeah, or waiting for something to happen. Maybe another, grant cycle has to happen before we do this thing. And I've also added this field called deadline, which is of the type date. And that is a special field because it will show up here. And then when you click it, it'll automatically show you a calendar. And you can select the date that you want. So let's say, I want to move this down to December 13th, 2023, and so make that the new deadline. I can do that. I think I had it as November 10th originally. And you'll see that that should also appear. I think it should appear. Maybe not. Okay. All right, well, it definitely appears in this view. I think there might be a way to show it on the repository specific page, but you can see the deadlines here. And if you know, this is all of these tags and stuff, they're all optional. And you can choose which ones have which tags. And I kind of glossed over this part as well, but there's different views. So each of these tabs here, they're different views. So this is a table view where I've grouped it by milestone. This is a Kanban where I showed you guys before, I've grouped it by priority. There's also this is new. This has been requested by GitHub users for years now, and they finally just implemented it. It's called roadmap view. And the advantage of roadmap view is that it's basically a timeline. And anything that I've assigned a date, so the date field, you can select, I selected that the target date, which is basically, you can think of a start and end date. Target date is essentially the same as a deadline. So it makes sense to use the field deadline, which I created before, as the one that is basically going to place this somewhere on that timeline. Now, I haven't added start dates for any of these, so it'll just appear as like the same width. But if I were to add another beginning date, let's say I started this on August 21st, it would basically extend this this little box all the way to the left, and it would actually show the update manuscript to demo new R workflows features. Actually, it kind of already has that here, but it would be basically embedded within that. And I've also sorted this according to the deadline. So basically means you have this kind of waterfall effect where the things that are due the soonest, so these things are all due this Friday for me, that's showing up at the very top. And then as you scroll down, they'll get later and later and later until finally, this is where I'm submitting the final revisions of my thesis after I do my Viva, at least the plan is to do that. And then below that, you have all the things that I haven't assigned dates, you know, either because I haven't gotten to it yet, or just it's not important to have a specific date because they're really, really low priority. And it's just kind of whenever I get to it. So that's one way you can use this, but you can also use a lot of the features that I was showing before, where let's say, instead of organizing by deadline, I want to organize by priority. Also, I've noticed I've now lost my place because I was scrolling back and forth. You can just go to today and it'll bring you over to today. So now you'll see that waterfall effect is now a little bit shuffled, where you have the priority, the top priority is now here, and it'll go, yeah, you can see priority high is here, high, and then if I were to go down, medium, and so forth. And you can show exactly like what element you want shown here. In terms of like, I think I can program this so that it shows me the priority here instead of the date. I just liked having the date right there because it can be a little hard to read unless you're hovering directly over it. And then there's this other bar here, which is called a marker. So the marker is basically, I've set it to be the milestone. So this basically means you can, in addition to setting individual issues, having deadlines, you can set overall milestones as having deadlines. So, there's a bunch of tasks that I have to do in order to publish the R Workflows paper that relate to the manuscript itself, to adding new features, to documenting those features. But then the workflow, R Workflows manuscript itself, I want to have published by a certain date. And you can see here that I've set that date as November 30th. I'd like to have it online, published with everything by November 30th, taking into account, delays in the editorial office and formatting and all that stuff. That's my projected goal. And then it's a little bit annoying, but if you have the same milestone in multiple repositories, it'll show it as just 5 milestones, but this is all the same milestone, which is publish the rare diseases manuscript, which I have as a tentative deadline of January 31st. And then, model cell type conservation being February 29th. So this basically, it may feel a little bit overcomplicated for what you're trying to do, but I think when you have a lot of different projects, a lot of moving parts, it's quite helpful to have a overall visualization of what needs to be done and when. And I think it just helps ground everything realistically about what is possible and what needs to be done to achieve those things. So in making this, I realized, I knew that I had my thesis submission coming up soon, and I knew that I had a lot to do, but I never really ever plotted out exactly how am I going to do that, what needs to be done by when, in order to realistically accomplish all the things that I want to do. There's a lot of papers that I would like to publish, a lot of things that I'd like to get out. And if I'm going to do that in a reasonable amount of time, and as opposed to just kind of how I work by default, which is I'll work on this today, I'll work on this today. Oh, Nathan wants me to do this right now, I'll do this right now. And it's it gives you an overall view of, what you're going to do by what date. And, if we go back to the ordering by deadlines, this was quite helpful in figuring out, okay, when do I have to have the first draft of my thesis done by? I had no idea. And I basically worked my way backwards. I started with saying, when do I want to submit the final revisions of my thesis after my Viva? I said May 29th in 2024. All right, to do that, when do I have to do the PhD Viva? Well, let's say it takes me 2 weeks to do the edits.
Optimistic.
Yeah, exactly. All tentative dates. It's been done.
Also means you have to get the written feedback within that time frame as well.
Also true. So yeah, maybe I need to adjust that. And the other nice thing is, instead of going into the metadata, I can actually just move this over.
Yeah.
And now
And also submit thesis to Viva in 2 weeks as well.
Yeah, it has to be a month is minimum.
Yeah, and that's short, like it's
usually
like
6
3
weeks.
months or something.
Okay. So there you go. Yeah, already identified a problem in my plan, but I can adjust, and at least I'm aware of that fact.
Well, you're not, and GitHub is aware.
Well, yes. So where did I have this? There. But yeah, I mean, it basically will plot out like, so yeah, maybe I need to adjust these and give more time in between, which would basically move back the initial date here earlier. And now I know that I need to get this first draft done substantially earlier than I imagined if I want to accomplish all the things, this final task of submit the thesis by the end there. You'll also notice that there's little people popping up here. So I can assign tasks, different issues to different people. I am going to potentially request Sarah and Alan to have a look over my thesis before I submit it to Nathan, just to get some initial feedback and anything that might be, super obvious. I have some other friends that I may want to submit this to as well. And something that I'm working on now is when you initially assign someone an issue as a task that they have to do, they'll get an email. Usually, I think by default, you'll get an email that says, you've been assigned this task. What GitHub doesn't do is send reminders. So if I've assigned Sarah the task of reading my thesis, this is very far ahead in time. And I guarantee we're both going to forget that we assigned this, right? And that we assigned it for a particular time. So what I'm looking into now is finding a way to set up automatic reminders and notifications so that if someone's been assigned to a task for a particular deadline, what I can do then is basically just ask GitHub to say, okay, email this person because you have their, it's connected to their GitHub accounts. Email this person 2 weeks before this deadline and remind them that they have this thing that I asked them to do. Or you can do it 1 week before, or 1 day before. And that way, even if they're not paying attention to that issue at all, they'll still get a reminder and hopefully will then have a better chance of doing the thing by the deadline. That's still a work in progress right now. I've seen some people trying to implement something like that on the GitHub Marketplace, and there are requests for that from users to the GitHub team to add something like that. So maybe GitHub will add a feature like that, but I'm looking into ways to do that. The other way would be to set a calendar invite manually and, just make sure that if you change the date for one of these, you also update the calendar invite. But that's quite manual, tedious. I'd like to automate that if I can. And it should be possible in theory. Cool. The other thing I should mention is there's filters here. These filters are basically ways of filtering the different issues. And right now I have the filter is open. So I don't need to right now visualize every issue that I've ever documented and closed. I just need to show the ones that are open. If I wanted to show everything, I could do this. It's not going to show a big difference because I think, oh yeah, so here's some. I mostly assigned ones that were open when I made this. But you can see here that I already addressed this a while ago. And so to reduce the clutter, you can just set that. And now I'm only paying attention to the ones that are still open and need to be addressed. The other thing is there's different, in this table view, you have different columns. You can customize which columns you want. You can sort by any of these columns. And the other nice aspect of the table view is it's like an Excel sheet. I can copy and paste these deadlines so that I don't have to go into each issue manually and assign them that way. I can similarly assign tags, or rather labels, assignees, or let's say I hadn't assigned any of these a priority yet. Well, I just copy and paste low priority, and now it's done for all of those. So it's much faster than if you were to try to do it manually. Yeah.
I don't even see this table and Kanban and stuff on my GitHub.
You do have to set up a project first.
Yeah, but I'm now in your project, like I'm in the
Oh, this is
our
private.
workflows, okay.
Yeah, sorry. That's another thing to mention. Projects can be public or private. At the top here, you'll see this little lock. That means this is private.
Hmm,
This is only visible to the people that I choose to make it visible to.
okay,
Now,
but I can see so I can see all the issues,
yes, yeah,
but I
that's
cannot,
because our workflows and all its issues are public.
okay,
But if I wanted to show my overall project and how I'm managing everything and how I've assigned things,
okay,
that's currently private.
okay, I see.
If you were
He's
to,
stalking his thesis.
yeah,
No, I'm just trying to figure out, because I think I do have a repository, maybe that's not a project.
right, yeah. So maybe it would be helpful to show you guys how you would start from scratch in terms of making a project. I'm trying to find a good example here.
Maybe we should do it for TipSeek.
Yeah? Which repo would that be? Or which repo should we start with for that? Actually, I do have some projects for TipSeek, recently viewed. Yeah, here's all the projects. I do have SC TipSeek, Epigenomic QC, and this one is SC TipSeek, and then type by benchmark. So we actually do have a project for that. So
So I have this thing, wet lab, I see wet lab stuff, TipSeek wet lab stuff. But that's not a project then, that's just a repository.
yeah, but it looks like it is associated with a project. It is a repository, you're right. But it looks like if you see the projects tab there above,
This one?
yeah, there's a label that says 1. That means that repo is associated with one project.
I see TipSeek.
Repos can be associated with more than one project if you want as well, because there can be overlap. Like magma cell typing, parts of it are associated with my thesis, but it's also associated with magma cell typing benchmarking, which were projects from some previous theses. So
Okay, and then
Yeah.
I'm in the table view right now.
yeah, so there you go.
Okay,
So for those who can't see online, Maria has the GitHub project for SC TipSeek protocol dev.
okay,
If you wanted to, you could just assign that to one of our other existing projects, just for the sake of consolidation, like add it to SC TipSeek. But maybe you want to have your own project specifically for that, so you can access all of that.
Right, I've just added you to the SC TipSeek protocol dev.
Yeah,
project.
I
okay,
mean, that's the wet lab protocol development. I don't know, maybe it makes sense to keep them separate from the pipeline. Or-
Yeah, here it is. I should have access to all of them anyway, because I'm currently an admin for neurogenomics.
Yeah, you're here, okay.
But yeah, right, so here's our view. If we wanted to, let's say, group this by repository, do that. Don't currently have assignees for these, but I assume that's probably all you, Maria.
I mean, this is really old.
Right, so yeah, you may want to update some of it, but, and you can close some of them, but it would be, this might be a good example of how someone in the wet lab might use GitHub in order to coordinate with everyone else in the lab. And if we have sort of these larger projects where it incorporates repositories maintained by people who are working on the wet lab part, and repositories that are maintained by people who are on the dry lab side doing the computational analyses, we can see everything all in this one project view. And we can know like, okay, Maria needs to optimize this step in the protocol, or she's planning on running sequencing on these samples by this date. Then, we'll have a better idea of when the dry lab people should probably make some time to do the analyses for that. And when we're planning on approximately getting that done by. And then we can go back to Maria and say, okay, we've done these analyses. Here are the results. I've posted it. I've written a brief summary in this issue. And here's the file and the images in my GitHub repository with the analysis results. And then we can close that issue and move on to the next thing.
I think what we might be able to do is just like link to LabStep. So you can just post into an issue, like here is the figure on the LabStep.
It should be possible. That's another thing that I'd like to check out, because I think it would be rather redundant to have Maria or any web lab personnel to go through and add every single experiment that they do in both LabStep and GitHub, right? That would be a lot of wasted time for you.
But I think the LabStep keeps track of what an experiment was, and it doesn't have that sort of why an experiment was done. It doesn't have
That's true.
any of the project management side. Do you agree, Maria?
Yes. Yeah, it doesn't do project management. I mean,
Yeah.
we do write a little rationale to every, but obviously that's just within the
Yep.
specific document,
Sentence.
not,
Yeah.
there's no overview.
So yeah, that might be there might be some way to use both of those, where if you open up an issue in this project associated with a particular repo that says we want to optimize this step, there's going to be a set of experiments you need to do in order to optimize that step. And those experiments are all logged in LabStep. It would be nice to have a way to link directly to
Yeah, I agree.
those. It should all be possible because LabStep has an API. Basically, you can programmatically do this. You could even have it so that when a new experiment is made in LabStep, I know LabStep has different metadata tags that you can add, and maybe if it's detected that it has a particular tag that maybe says, oh, it's part of this project, it will automatically create an issue in a GitHub repository that will basically say like, oh yeah, this is the status of this, and that's getting a little bit complicated, but I'll look into whether someone's already done something like that, because there's a lot of open source apps for GitHub that integrate with a lot of other platforms. So there may be one for LabStep that could do something like that.
Okay.
But if nothing else,
I mean, that would give us actually an incentive to really fill in these.
exactly, yes,
No,
exactly,
it's
exactly.
true, because at the moment,
Yeah,
they're there, and it's like, what for?
absolutely.
Have someone OneDrive, our raw data, would it be possible to also like link to OneDrive and get the raw data from there to GitHub maybe?
You
So
mean,
we need to, that's something, actually, it's another question. I'm sorry, but
well, let me answer that first. So, yeah, there's different ways you could do that. You could provide just the link. Assuming I haven't used OneDrive very much, but I assume you can generate a link that you can share with people that will bring them to that file, assuming they have the correct permissions, or their account's authenticated to access that file. Then you could just provide that link in the issues. If it's sensitive data, you may want to make the repo private, but it's kind of already protected, assuming that you've limited the access to the file to only certain people with a certain OneDrive account. That's one way you could do it. You could also take it a step further. I'm sure OneDrive also has an API that if you wanted to pull in data. It depends on how you're doing your analysis, how you're actually using it. But like, for example, sometimes I'll host data in one place and then I'll have scripts that I'll run locally that pulls from that data repository and run some analyses on the samples. But yeah, you could definitely, I mean, anything that you have a link for, you could just post in the comments of an issue. Your question.
Yeah, so maybe you part answered that. So if you do have stuff that you don't want to be publicly available.
Yeah.
Like, so we do this development and we don't want to.
Yep.
Anyone to basically.
Yeah.
See it at the moment.
Absolutely.
Publish on things, whatever.
Yep. So
we just do.
You can just make it private. Yeah, so you can make things
That's
private.
private beyond that private thing.
Yeah, so there's different aspects of privacy. And for this, let me just go back to my thesis. Okay, so the project thesis is private. I'm just showing this to certain people. But some of the repos and their associated issues are public.
Okay, so, but I can see the different things that you are working on. Is that because I'm part of the neurogenomics group, or can
Probably, yeah.
anyone see this?
You can see, I thought before you said you couldn't see the project. You could see the repository.
I can see the repository, I can see your issues.
You
Yes,
could probably only see issues
from our workflows.
from public repositories.
Yeah, so our workflows is public.
Okay,
This is kind of what I was getting at. You can have public repositories as part
I see.
of a private. So in essence, like a lot, even though I have this as private, a lot of it's still public, right? Because the repositories themselves are public. But you could go the other way around as well. You could say, I want to include some private repositories in this public project. And then I believe it will only show the ones that are public to the public. And then you, as the owner, will see everything. You could also just make everything private. Say, like, I want to make the project private, and I want to make all the repositories that I'm associating with this project private, so that, you know, everything's top secret. No one outside of the organization has access. I think you can probably also set who within your organization has, yeah, so here it is, manage access. Right now, I think it's just me and probably the other admins. If I wanted to, here we go. So I want to add everyone from the Scheme Lab. Maybe just read out. So now this is based, you can, there's something called teams on GitHub organizations where you can put together teams of people so that I don't have to individually add every single person. I can just add the whole team and assign them all the same permissions, including all the legacy members, which I probably need to update. But yeah, Tom's here, so at least that part's updated.
Roxy's there.
Roxy's there. So yeah, we probably do need to do some cleaning. If you wanted to be a little bit more judicious with who you're sharing this with, you could just go through and add people individually. But that's a way that you have very granular control over who sees your projects. You could do the same thing with repos. It's a very almost identical mechanism for repositories. Who sees them and who also can write to them. And then the next level up is admin, which basically means you can like delete the repository or transfer it to another organization or something like that. So you generally just reserve that for people who really need it. You can also select what the base role is when you add a new person. It'll default to you know, I have it defaulting to write, for example, but you can have it default to admin, read, or no access. So, yeah, those are all the features so far. I imagine, I hope GitHub's going to keep adding to this, and I'll try to keep up with it. And I'll also have a look and see if there might be, or maybe, I don't know, Tom, since you're going to be doing some stuff, are you going to be working with LabStep as well?
Yeah.
So Nathan, if you're okay with it, and Tom, you're okay with it, maybe you could look into whether there's some GitHub integrations for LabStep. That would be really helpful.
Yeah, sure.
Awesome. And that would, I think, help bring coordination with the wet lab and the dry lab closer together, and making sure that it's all in one place that we can view, and we have timelines. We know what our progress is, and you know what we need to get done by when in order to complete some goal. So that's kind of the point of all this, but this is my setup. It's, as I was showing you before, it's highly customizable. So you can tailor it to however works best for you. But once you know some of the basic elements, you can get going with it. Any questions? Okay.
I think just a note on it, like as in the document I sent you to earlier today, there's like a list of to-dos in there. I'd suggest just try turning them into an issues. Just try getting it started as a, how would you structure it as a project on there? Tom,
Yeah.
you know, try doing the same. Just try to think through what are the issues for the kind of things we've discussed, lay them out as issues.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Then you can all watch as I struggle to come to terms with everything in real time. So
yeah, you can choose the level of detail as well, right? Like maybe to just start, you can just have it as like the title, and maybe the comments are empty. But as you get more comfortable and get into the flow of things, you can start adding more detail. So now it's, you know, the way that I write issues is a little bit more stream of consciousness, because I just assume I'm going to forget everything.
That's why I would caution against just writing it as titles.
Yes, yeah.
It is most useful when you use it as stream of consciousness, when it really is, you're struggling to understand this yourself, and you just write down what you're struggling to understand. And, you know, it does sometimes become like a message board. Like the useful thing is where it is, you know, a debate, a whole discussion winds up taking place within an issue.
Even if that discussion is with yourself, like this.
Exactly.
I have a lot of conversations with myself on GitHub, and I find that very helpful, because it's basically, it's like, okay, this is a problem. All right, I made this fix, but wait, now there's another problem. Okay, well, I tried this, I reached out to them. All right, well, they said this. And I basically assume, again, that I'm just going to forget everything. And this is a little bit of time investment, but I think it saves you a lot of time in the long run, because I cannot tell you the number of times I have come up with, I come across some error, and I know that I've come across this before for a fact, and I have no clue how I solved it. And I have to go through the entire process of scouring Google, asking people, just trying to reconstruct how did I fix this originally. If you have it documented, you only have to fix it once, and you can immediately search for that issue, and you'll know how to fix it again. It's useful for yourself. It's useful for other people. It's very easy. Like if someone's asking you for advice on how to fix something, you can, rather than having to write out a long explanation or have a long discussion about it, you can literally just send them a link to this issue. Here's how I solved it. You can even add a link to a specific section that should, oh yeah, this is the exact step where I solved it, and here's the instructions on how to do it. It saves me time when, you know, I'm helping other people to solve the same problems over and over again. So yeah, I think it's, yeah, as Nathan said, you know, having more detail, more, you know, links, and just, you know, making things as well documented as is reasonable is a good idea. But if you, the only reason I said to, you know, maybe just start with things as like a title or just very, very minimal is just to reduce the level of intimidation. Something is better than nothing, for sure. And even just one sentence in the comments is better than no comments. And you can choose exactly how detailed you want to make it. And you can always go back and edit. I do that constantly. You know, I wrote a little note to myself, and then when I actually started doing the thing, I expanded on that and clarified what I meant so that I would remember exactly what it is that I meant, and it's clear to other people what I meant. So that's also quite useful. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
I think basically everyone in the lab's projects would be improved by them doing this. I'm fully behind. Everyone should. So, thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Of course.
I'm feeling inspired.
Yeah, I remember when I first, I guess when I joined the lab, I was using GitHub and I was using GitHub issues, but not as extensively as I am now. And Kitty, you'll remember that we had a Google spreadsheet in the beginning, which was all the projects kind of by columns, and then every day
Oh, yes.
as rows.
Yes.
And then every cell I would write out all the things that I had done in bullets. That's basically a really shitty version of this. And a very unsustainable one, and that was not, you know, didn't have all these useful metrics and filtering and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, I've tried a bunch of different ways of trying to organize myself, and so far, this is the way that works the best for me. And I think it works quite well for anyone who's even passively using GitHub. Yeah, like I said, you don't need to be a full-time programmer or even part-time to make use of this stuff, because GitHub has gone so far beyond just code at this point, and they show no signs of stopping. For those who don't know, it's owned by Microsoft now. They purchased GitHub a number of years back, and they're continuing to make huge investments in it and integrating with lots of other products that they make. So I think it's a worthwhile investment. And I also just saw some posts recently about how GitHub is really continuing to be dedicated to making open source possible and making as much of things free as possible. Getting a lot of money allocated specifically towards that. The specifics of that will change over time. You know, maybe we won't be able to have infinite repos one day, but I think from what I've seen and historically, they are quite committed to making things continually free in some degree or another. And it's usually quite permissive in terms of what they're willing to make free. So yeah. I won't keep you guys any longer. We can cover the other stuff another time, but yeah, AutoCV, our workflows, they're both public, so you can check them out. And if you have any questions, let me know.
Thank you. That was really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.